I'm going to make sure I'm recording. I am good. But yeah, we just want this binbot zipped folder or this normal binbot folder. Because like I said, this is what you're going to be using for this project as well as your final. Once you guys do have that downloaded, give me a thumbs up either in the chat on your window or just a nod that you're ready in here. Cool. Just so I know. Once you do get this download, go ahead and open up Maya. Don't just immediately open up binbot. If you already have opened up binbot, make sure you set the project and then reopen the file. Binbot's very picky. He's kind of like Hobo. If you just forget to set the project, he can break. So do make sure you're setting your project with binbot before you open him. So I'm going to set my project, then open my scheme. Now inside of the scenes, you do have a couple of different versions of binbot you can pick from. I have tried desperately to get rid of this mental ray nodes pop-up. Nothing I do works. The internet says what I've done should work. It does not. The internet has lied to me. It will also tell you about the color management. You just got to tell it okay. If you're using an older version of Maya, 2020, not 0.1, we have 0.2, or if you're using 2019 or 18 or anything like that, you shouldn't have to worry about the color management pop-up whatsoever. But if for some reason your BinBot is giving you problems, it is not unheard of that for some reason he just stops working on certain things. Parts of his skin weights come undone. There is a skin weight. I'm pretty sure I fixed it in 1.9 in his hand, where there's this tiny point of his hand that doesn't move properly. If that happens, you can manually repaint that skin weight. I won't care too terribly much. It's a rig problem. But if that's something you want to do because it's bugging you to fix, let me know. I'll help out. Make sure it gets painted properly. But it should be working in 1.9 right here. If it's not, and your rig is breaking, sometimes people have reported that they'll be halfway through an animation blocking pass, which we'll talk about in a second. And his entire skin comes off. He's no longer rigged for whatever reason. Let me know immediately. We can get that reskinned. You might have to repaint some skin weights, but that's something we can fix. Or you can try using one of these older versions in here. You can also try using the version 2020. I'm currently using the 1.9. I found that I just personally like using this one a little bit, but the 2020 should work perfectly fine, especially if you're using 2020. Or if you really want, you can go back to 1.7, which is from 2017, or you can go back even further to 2014 in the old folder, where there's version 1.5. So you have options on which version you want to use, whichever might be more stable for you, or if you have an older version of Maya. Okay. So this is BinBot. He is BobBot's older two-legged brother. And he's got some really nice controls in here. But the first thing we actually want to do with BinBot is I do want to make sure I have his mesh layer locked, his environment layer locked. This way I can toggle them off or on. You can see his joints if you want to. I like having them off. This way all we can select is his actual controls in here. I'm going to open up our little outliner. You should not have to make a button with BinBot unless you want to. All of his controls are right here. You don't have to hunt for them. They're under TSM3 controls. If you do want to make a button, just make sure that you select each one of these individually, or you can click on the top one, then click on the bottom one, and set a key that way. So you shouldn't have to make a button unless you just want to make a button for BinBot. They're all right here. The rigger did this for you. So just like with some of the other rigs we've looked at, he's a little bit complex. He's got all of his wrist, elbows, arms, shoulder. He's also got some hand controls here. So even though he doesn't have fingers, we still have that paddle hand kind of look. So when you are animating him, we got to make sure we bend those fingers a little bit. We do have eye controls here. Even though you can't see him looking, that's his look. We have the overall eye roll. You can see the undersides of his eye, so just be aware. We have the top of his head as a roll. We have his midsection, turns him a little bit further down. We have his hips. We have the whole top of the torso, the shoulder socket. So should you need to roll that to get a better position for your animation, it is there. Then we have, oh, I already went over that one. We have his main root control. This is the one that allows him to bend up and down, move side to side for weight. We also have some knee controls. One bends or shifts from the hip, one shifts from the knee. Then we have ankle lift, toe lift, foot lift, and roll. So it rolls from the ankle. And then inside of his main control here, he also has IK, FK switches for individual arms and legs. So should he need to roll over or fly through the air or anything like that, you can toggle those FK, IKs. And his spine also has an FK, IK switch. So you can see if I toggle that on, the controls change. I'm no longer able to rotate, but I can move him. Same with his arm. If I toggle that on, you'll see some different controls appear. Now we have rotation from the shoulder, moving of the elbow, lifting of the wrist, and more of an away as like your knee would, because we have shifted to IK. So you can definitely change how these move and interact based off IK and FK. BendBot is rigged extremely well. You'll also notice he's in an environment. He's got a nice big old lit background and a floor. If you would like to do so, you can change this at any time, but it's already built in here for you. So, what are we going to be doing with Little BendBot? We are going to be character animating. This is exactly what you have always wanted. It's going to be so much fun. We've talked a little bit about posing. We talked a little bit about that acting is reacting, that see, think, do. If a character's in an environment, we have to give it something to stimulate it or react to. So think about, remember how I said I would, if I saw Greg in the hallway, same thing. If you were to see Big Bird randomly, you first have to see Big Bird. Think about why would you be seeing Big Bird and then react to seeing Big Bird. But we also have to make any actions we do believable. So on that, because we're going to be acting through our character, we have to be thinking about a couple of different things. Art in any form, painting, animation, game design, is a form of communication. There's something in my head that I need to give to you guys. There's something in your guys' head that you need to get to me and anyone else that might be your audience. How do we convey that, or how we convey that in text, pictures, sound, and how someone receives it can be a little bit difficult. So take a second and think about an apple. I am also thinking about an apple. Me just saying, think about an apple is probably different to how you would be thinking about an apple. Oops, wrong button. So for instance, I was thinking about this yellow one. You guys might have been thinking about a red one, or a green one, or a completely different multicolored apple, right? So when we are thinking about how we're going to convey something, we need to make sure we're being very clear. If I'm thinking about, let's say, my mother, your picture of your mom probably popped into your head. If I say think about my mom, you're thinking about your mom. You have no idea what my mom looks like. Half the time I don't know what my mom looks like. She's, hours away. For all I know, the outfit I'm picturing her in doesn't exist anymore. We need to make sure that we're communicating accurately what we're thinking about and how we're going to let others know that's what we're thinking about. So instead of being louder, we don't want to repeat things. We just want to have a clearer way of thinking about and communicating what we want to have happen. So if I say, I'm thinking of an apple, it's yellow and kind of mottled with red, you do think of something closer to this little guy. It's clearer, it's not louder, it's not repeated. I'm not like, I'm thinking of an apple. It's an apple. Think about this apple. No, I'm thinking of a yellow apple with some little red spots. So we do the exact same thing when we're animating. If we want to animate Ben Butt here to be sad, how would we portray him being sad in a very clear, communicative way? What would you do? What actions are sad? I know it's early. I can use your brains. How do we perceive sadness in others? They're more still. They're kind of pulled down a little bit. Head's kind of down. Arms kind of drag. Feet might be slower to pick up. What about happy? How would you guys perceive happiness in a character? Huh? A little bit of pep in his step. Maybe he's looking up at the clouds. Hands are really going. We need to be sure when we're animating with these characters, all you are doing is acting through them. But you need to make sure that you're communicating what you're trying to say clearly. Not louder, not repeated, but clear. Now, how we make that clearer is, like I said, through your posing, through the appeal of the actions, through the overall staging. How we clarify poses can be either subtle or exaggerated, but mostly it's through the overall pose-to-pose method that we talked about last class. So let's do this a little bit together. So I'm going to go up here to panels, and I'm going to tear off a copy and drag it somewhere else. For you guys at home, if you have two monitors, what this does is it gives you a couple of different angles that you can work with. So I can now take this torn off copy and I can say, hey, I want to look at this copy here, but I also want to be able to change this to a new camera. So maybe I have my render view on this torn off copy. So maybe this is the view I want to render. And this is the view that I'm going to be panning around and animating in. You can also do this in the panels layout side by side. Either one of those will let you do this, but you do want to be able to see multiple different angles while you're animating characters. This will give you a better idea of space, how they're moving, interacting with objects. You don't want to get stuck in one camera, just like when you're modeling inside of Maya. You don't want to get stuck in one perspective. You want to be tumbling around and moving. It's the same way with animation, but we want to be able to see multiple different angles all at the same time. So for me, because so that you guys can see it a little better, I'm going to have this as perspective right here. So I have one perspective view and another perspective view. Ideally, you would have both of these and a torn off render copy on a different screen. Since you can't see my other screen, I am just going to have the two right here. Now, like I said, you don't need to make a button for BinBot. He has all of his buttons already laid out in this TSM3 control. But if you are a fan of making those buttons and having them for a bit more ease of use, you can do that. I won't tell you no. But you don't have to if you don't want to. It'll save you a step. Other things to know about BinBot here. If we go into our hypershade, before we start actually posing him and getting him animated, turn his mesh layer on real quick. You can change his color. So currently we are using this material called Matte Rusty. If you're like, I don't like this, he looks not that great, you can change that. We also have Matte Dirty. So he's a little yellow, a little bit rusty, but not too bad. We also have Material Clean. He's red, doesn't have any rust. And then we also have a different clean where he's blue. You can use any of those textures. You can use any material of those four for your BinBot. But for me, I'm going to go back to this rusty one. But I wanted to make sure you guys were aware that those were some options. So if you're like, I really don't like this rusty version, I want him to be blue, or maybe your favorite color is yellow, you can mix it up. Also, before you start animating anything, character-wise, go get some reference of yourself. You might not look like BinBot. I mean, you're not a robot, obviously. Or are you? How many traffic lights are in these images? You can still get timing. You can still get facial expressions. You can get the timing of motion. If you're going to do a jump, how long does it take you personally to do that jump to get that overall timing? So always record yourself, get some reference. If you're going to be working with animalistic types of rigs, go Google animals reacting to things. Not only is it good reference, it is adorable. If you live with pets, watching them do certain things will get you really good reference. This poor little fierce kitty. Reference is really important when you're animating. All right. So let's say you have your reference, you've picked your material, you've got your button or your controls that you're going to use for keyframing. What do we do now? We got to start posing. So currently he is in that kind of T pose. He's got those paddle hands, his feet are parallel, all of those things I told you guys to change in our pose to pose lecture. First thing we got to do is figure out what angle we are going to be at. So I'm going to say something about like this. And then we have to decide what are they going to be reacting to. For your project that we're going to start today, you can go ahead and start with me right now if you want to, is BinBot is going to be either stepping over or under an object. Now you can also have him walk up to that object. You can have him do multiple different things. However, all that will be required is for him to step over or under an object. So I'm going to make him an object to interact with because he has to see something in order to react to it, right? So I'm going to make a little box. BinBot is also absolutely massive, by the way. This is the standard cube size. You can see it. It's like smaller than my mouse pointer. So he is massive. So I'm going to make this a nice, tiny little box, something smaller than his knee. You don't want it to go too far up. Think about if you're stepping over like a shoebox, or if there's a pole on the road, something like that. But he can also step onto stuff, which is what we're going to be doing with my BinBot here. So I'm going to have this box. I'm going to make it so it goes all the way across. And I'm just going to throw a material on it so you guys can see it a little bit better. I'm just going to throw a standard Lambert. Make like this tealish colored box. All right, so we have our rig, we have our interacting object, we might have our reference. Now it is time to pose. So before we start anything, I'm going to go ahead and take BinBot and put him in a more relaxed stance on my first frame. Now I'm using the first frame, even though it says I can go to 0. I'm not using 0 because this is my original binding pose. If anything messes up and I'm like, oh, I got to scrap everything. If I set a keyframe of all of his controls on that frame 0, I will always have a reference to go back to. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to click all of these controls right here. And on frame 0, I'm just going to hit a set key. And then I'm going to change my timeline so I will never see it. I'm going to put it back so that I'll start on 1. And then on that frame 1, that is where I'm going to start changing my pose. Definitely be using auto key if that's something you like. I'm personally not a fan of it. I tend to mess up animations. That's all personal preference. It's definitely a really good resource for you guys, though, so definitely be using it if it's something you're comfortable with. And from here, I'm just going to go ahead and pose him and get him in a more relaxed state. So I'm going to take his arm. Also, if you guys aren't aware, this is one of those kind of like tricks that sometimes instructors tell you guys. If you ever need to make your move tool, rotation tool, or scale tool smaller or larger, you can use the plus and minus buttons on the keyboard next to backspace. So if it's ever in your way of your controls, you can make it smaller or larger. Just kind of as an FYI. So I'm just going to kind of move him around a little bit, relax his posing a little bit more. Let me roll that in a little bit. Maybe back. Remember, also be shifting some of these hand pieces. You can click on this lollipop, and it'll kind of move all of them a little bit. Or you can click each individual hand piece, then the lollipop, and use the rotation tool, and they'll all move in tandem. So if I wanted to make this thumb kind of rolled in, maybe down, they'll all kind of move at the same time to give you a more exaggerated roll in. So we just want to take BenBot, take a minute or so. And pose him a little bit. Also going to relock my mesh layer because I forgot to do that. When you're making these poses, be thinking about your contrapposto, be thinking about your overall silhouette. So if this right here is going to be my overall pose, we want to make sure we can see all that nice negative space. We want to be able to tell what's going to be happening at any given point. And then once we have all of our nice neutral first pose set, we're just going to make sure we set that key. Now, if you're using auto key, you still want to make sure that before you shift poses, that you are setting all of your keys anyway. This will keep weird things from happening. So let's say if you don't move an arm on one frame, you still won't have it continuing the motion early or anything weird like that. So regardless of if you're using a button, if you're not using keyframe or if you, auto key, or if you are, you still want to, every time you've created a pose, set a keyframe on all of your controls. Now, while you're getting your nice neutral pose all set up, a couple things to keep in mind. Depending on which BenBot version you're using, you may or may not have eyeballs. When you're posing eyes, you normally don't see all of the white over the pupil unless someone's super scared or surprised. I don't think you can change that in this one. But for characters similar to Hobo, that's a really nice tip. If someone's super scared, you see more white. If someone's super excited, you see more pupil. That sort of thing. Something else to be aware of is if you are working with a character and you're only going to be seeing the shoulders and the head, you don't want to be posing things like the legs during that time unless you're going to be like moving up and down. Try to only pose what you know is going to be seen or interacted with based off your camera. Since we are using a full framed camera right here, I need to see all of my stuff, so I will be keyframing all of my controls. But if all I'm seeing is the hand and maybe like somewhere near the hips, I don't really need to be moving the head around unless it's going to be shifting the entire body. So be hyper aware of not wasting time on things that aren't going to be seen in individual shots. Are there any questions before we start moving on with our character animation? Okay. So when we are making our poses, so we have our nice neutral pose here, we need to be thinking of the entire pose. We don't want to just think about the body or an arm or a leg. We want to think of the whole character at every single pose that we're going to be making. We can't say things like, I'm going to do that later, or I'll come back to that arm. We have to do the whole thing all at once. Think about this as if you're drawing it. If you were drawing BenBot in each one of these poses, you can't leave out an arm, or later on you won't know what that arm was supposed to be doing. You have to draw or keyframe your entire pose. We also don't want to scrub too early in our timeline. Remember, sometimes when we're animating, if we start trying to hit play too early before we've set too many keyframes, we want to start getting ahead. We want to start changing things. We don't want to do that till we've gotten our entire blocking pass done. So what's a blocking pass, you might ask? The blocking pass is your all the way through animated stepped preview. So I'm going to go ahead and on my timeline here, I'm going to check two things. I'm going to make sure that my playback speed is max real time or real time, but I'm also going to check this enable stepped preview. Whoop, I clicked a button. Ooh, auto snap keys. That's neat and new. That might be something y'all want to play with too. If you're going to be moving some keyframes, auto snapping it, that might be neat. But I'm going to turn on this enable step preview here. That way, when I hit play, I'm only going to be seeing my main animation. Now, this is before we add in overlapping action, and this is also before we start splining, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Now, if this enabled step preview, so I'm going to go ahead and do my next pose. If this enable step preview doesn't work, you will have to open up the graph editor and change all of your curves to the stepped mode. Which remember, to do that, all you have to do is highlight all of your keys and click this little stepped button right here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say maybe at about, I don't know, frame 20 or so, maybe frame 10. Yeah, I'm going to say about frame 20. He's going to look down and see this object he has to step over. So I'm going to go to frame 20. And I'm going to have him see this object. So again, you're thinking about your whole pose. You want to make sure you're keeping an eye on how individual parts of this pose are working. You want to make sure you're keeping an eye on your silhouette. And then once you have that noticed pose where they have seen this motion, we just want to make sure we keyframe that. So overall, we have our neutral pose and then where they see that object. And exaggerate that a little bit more. There we go. And since we've enabled that step preview, we only see those main poses. So once we get that C pose, so we have our C, we need our think, and then we'll need our do. So the next pose I'm going to set is going to be about on frame maybe 30, 35. And I'm going to have him thinking about lifting his foot to step onto this object. So what that might mean is maybe he leans to his other side. Maybe his heel goes up. Maybe he lifts his arms. Maybe he's a clumsy robot. Again, we're still thinking about our silhouette. And then we'll set another key. So now we have our neutral pose, our seeing pose, and our thinking pose. Once we have our thinking pose, we need our doing pose. Remember, see, think, do in that order. So I'm going to say about another 10 frames out. That's about how long I think it might take to lift a leg, to set it down onto something. This is a good point where I would use reference. So I'm now going to lift this leg. Move him forward. So you can see I'm using my secondary screen to keep my pose so I can keep an eye on my silhouette while I am moving around on my other part here. To make that a bit more clear, I'm going to move a couple things. I'm going to make sure I am shifting my weight. I'm keeping an eye on that contrapposto. And then once I'm done, I'm going to set a keyframe. So we have that neutral pose, the seeing pose, the thinking pose, the doing pose. Now we would continue in this way until we get an animation that we like. Now remember, we only want to see the stepped preview of these poses. So let's say I wanted to go back at any point and add some exaggeration. So let's say maybe we add something a little like this, maybe halfway through. We add a little bit of a bounce, maybe an anticipation of them seeing the object. So we would have a different pose. Turn that off. So we have our neutral. I would add in a little bit of a weight. Maybe his arms here would do that swing thing. Or if you go up and your arms kind of swing a little bit, maybe he'd rock back and forth on his heels for a little while. Then see the object he needs to step over. Think about what he's going to do and start to act on it accordingly. And then finally doing that action. In this way, we need to make sure we are keeping in mind all of our poses like a painting, as I said earlier. Keep in mind the whole pose. And then once you have all of your poses, your timing looks nice, and everything is looking how you want it. Bimbot steps up or under an object, and steps down or all the way through under an object. Your timing looks good, your poses are good and nice and strong. You've got that good silhouette all the way through. What you would then do is send this version in the real world to your art director. Your art director is me. So what you'll do is once you have all of your main poses and your blocking, so this is your blocking pass. If I hit play here, I can accurately read what is going to happen in this animation without any of those curves, without any of the in-betweens. This is the stage you want to get to by next class, so by Tuesday. On Tuesday, what will we do? Your project's not due this Tuesday, by the way, just your blocking pass. I want to be able to see what your animation is going to look like. Now, it doesn't have to be the final version. I just want to have an idea of what you're thinking. So you could always, by Thursday be like, I had to scrap that whole idea. I decided to change it. It just didn't look right. That's okay. Update me with a new blocking pass. Now, what do you do after you get done blocking? You start splining. What on earth is splining? Splining is the graph editor. So once we have our blocking stepped animation, you want to go to each pose. So let's say, I'm just going to start with this one. I'm going to come up here to the grease pencil. I'm going to add a new grease pencil on this frame. And all we want to do on each one of our poses is check our contrapposto. It doesn't have to be perfect. So right here and right here, that is not good contrapposto, is it? So we would want to come in and ever so slightly add a change. I went the wrong direction. So all you want to do, even though this is a subtle one, all you want to do is go through each of your main poses and check that contrapposto. So on this pose, I have a very subtle contrapposto. I might need to go through, add a bit more to here. Erase this line. Draw on a new one. Much better contrapposto. Maybe I'd go to frame 50. I'd do it again. Again, I don't have very good contrapposto. I would want to come in, curve some of my controls here. That's looking better. We want to make sure that we're getting this nice natural line of action, contrapposto, solid posing with that silhouette on all of your main poses. So anytime you have a pose, you need to go through and check your contrapposto. So on this frame, again, terrible contrapposto. I would have to come in and roll some stuff around. To get a stronger contrapposto. This will really help your overall animations. This will ensure that you have a strong pose, which will ensure you don't have to work as hard in your in-betweens. I also realized I did not have auto key on for any of these. There we go. All right, so once you have those poses, you've got that nice, strong contrapposto. What you can now do is disable your stepped preview. I'll fix this arm real quick. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead, exit out of my grease pencil. I'm going to right click down here and just re-enable that splining view. But I'm also going to come up here at the same time and change to my animation tab so I can see all of my curves. Currently, my spaghetti looks like poop. So if I hit play, it's not too bad. It needs a lot of work. I need to go through and check all my curves. I might need to add some moving holds or holding frames. Keep in mind when you're using holding frames and moving holds, sometimes they can hinder motion. Sometimes there's no motion when they happen, or sometimes they need more subtle motion. Moving holds are mostly still, they're not fully still. So if you do need to add one, for example, like this pose here on frame 10, this would be a moving hold. It's a very subtle motion that happens between two frames. So once you have all that, things you need to do next is you need to double check your timing, figure out where you need eases, where you need things to move faster, where you need things to move slower. You want to make sure you have overall control of your animation and not Maya. So for instance, if I hit play, I think this motion right here between 20 and 30 is very fast. I might need to ease that overall motion a bit. So what I might have to do is highlight all of my controls and zoom in here a little bit to see if there's any super highs or lows. Now I know that that overall motion that goes really quick between that 25 and that 30 are mostly on my torso pieces. So I'm just going to click those two torso pieces. And I would start animating and fixing those curves here. Now, if you just start willy-nilly with your splining, you're going to get lost in all that spaghetti. I can guarantee you. What you need to do is figure out where in your animation you want to start your splining. This is, remember, where we're starting in the graph editor to fix curves. I highly recommend, if you have a bipedal character or a character that has a main root body control that's more than one, start there. So I would start tippy top right here on his head. What I would do is come through here and be like, yes, that motion looks all right. And even though it's slow and I'm manually scrubbing through, you'll be able to see where things are going wrong and where things you might need to change are. So I know that overall blue curve right there, my rotate Z, is very, very big. It's a very big roller coaster of a curve. So I'm just going to move that up a little bit. I'm going to ease that a little bit. So even while, yes, that's still an exaggerated motion, and it's happening pretty quickly, it's less than what it was. It's a little bit more eased. Now I also might need to come in on this other keyframe and put that somewhere in the middle, so that's more of a natural motion. So you can see it dips a little bit lower. But when you are splining, you don't want to check just the ones you know need to be fixed. You want to check all of the controls. It's very tedious at first, and you might not even change anything at first. So I know I'm not going to be changing anything on this translate X, Y, or Z, but I might need to change something on this rotate. Maybe I need to ease this a little bit more. Make that more of a sloping curve. Maybe on this translate or this rotate Y, this curve here might need to be a little bit more eased. Or maybe this curve is much too high, which would bring me back to my rotate Z. I would then move down a control to this middle curve of the spine. Do the same thing. I'll start with translate X, Y, Z, rotate X, rotate Y. There's some things in here I might need to change, even at the very beginning. Maybe I want this first part here to be a bit more poppy. So I'd break my tangent and change this curve. That gives me a slightly faster hip roll to that belly. And then I might not need to change anything else in this curve. So then I'd go to Y or to Z. Check it. So you can see I already changed a little bit on here. I think that curve looks nice. I would then move down to my lower hips and repeat that process. You want to do this for each curve. You want to make sure that once you have that enable stepped preview turned off, or if you did use the stepped tangent, you have highlighted them all and taken them back to the default auto tangent. Once you have that, you just want to methodically work through each curve on each control until you've gone through all of them and checked how they are interacting with your character. I think by now, y'all are really good with the graph editor. Do y'all feel more confident with it? Feel a little bit more natural, not as scared of it as you used to be? Couple of nods. Those of you at home feel more confident in the graph editor? Yeah. Now keep in mind, not all of these are going to be somewhat, it takes time. Not all of these are going to be big, grandiose fixes. Some of them are going to be subtle. If I look at this overall root control, I have a bit of motion in here. I might need to just take this one up a little. That doesn't change my overall animation too much, does it? Not all of these are going to need changed, and not all of these are going to be big changes. Sometimes you'll have really large changes that you might need to do, but that's not always going to be the case. So back on where would we start? I highly recommend your root joint, your spinal column, and then either do the right arm and the left arm, or the right arm and the right leg, then the left arm and the left leg. However you do it, go piece by piece. So for me, I'd go root, all 3 spinal pieces, all the belly parts. I'd start on the eyes because they're in the middle of the body. Then I would do one arm and the shoulder, then that hand. Then I'd do the other arm and that shoulder and that hand. And then I would do one leg and the foot and then the knee, a leg, foot, knee. And then remember, we have this overall control joint on the very bottom that you do not want to touch. It's that big purple circle on the bottom. Now, when you're doing this, even if you're making very subtle changes to your overall graph editor, I highly recommend, before you've started that, you do a play blast. So I recommend right-clicking, play blast options. You don't have to change too much. I do recommend, if you have it, doing the QT, but if you don't, that AVI for your own personal gain will work. And when you save it to file, I highly recommend you calling it splining or blocking pass, or like splining pass 0. You haven't changed anything. Then, once you go through and you've checked all of your curves and you've done all the splining on one full pass, I recommend play blasting again and calling it splining pass 1. And then you're going to do it again. Splining allows you to see subtly small changes to your animation. A good way to check how everything's doing is with those play blasts. So every time you go through a full amount of splining, play blast it. It doesn't take too long. So the overall play blasts you would have, roughly for an animation, is you'd have your blocking play blast, that 0 first spline, your second spline, your third spline, and then probably 1 each hour until you run out of time. Anywhere you might need to change, whether it's rotation, forward and backward motion, all these little things, all those little subtle changes will eventually add up and make your animation look really nice, smooth, and natural. Now, when you're going through your animation, Look out for where you might need to add more anticipation. Where do you need more exaggeration? Are there any curves that you don't need completely that you can get rid of or completely change? Do you need to add more keys? Do you need to remove a key to get a better animation? And then, like I said, do this control by control and side by side. Think of all of those curves you have as though they're a roller coaster. If you would die on that roller coaster of curve, something's probably not right. When a rotation goes too flat, do you need to keyframe more in that area? Is there a duplicate in the area that makes your animation look unnatural? Playing around with your curves, changing your tangents will allow you to get more overshooting, undershooting, and exaggeration to your animation during this splining pass. Now, once you get your splines where you kind of like them, make sure you go back and add that overlapping action. Offset those curves. If your character is more eager, have the head move first, then the shoulders, and then the arms, then the hands, then the legs. Or is the character a little bit more floppy? Is the head more back? The feet kind of go first. And you can always change those back or around as needed. All of that will help with your overall posing and animation as well. Now, splining, I'm going to keep saying it, does mean that you're going through every single curve. Just put your headphones on, kind of zen yourself out. Each concentration that we have here does have some part of tedium to it. If you're an animator, it's this, it's splining. If you're a modeler, it's UVs. If you're a rigger, it's skin weights. If you work in Photoshop mostly, it's painting masks. If you're a visual effects artist, it's caching. There is always a small level of tedium, but you can also work on this for hours and not realize it. But you do have to look at every single control. There should never be a point when you're just like, I'm done with it. It's over. I'm ready for it to be done. It should always be, is there something I can change to make this look a little bit better, more natural? So overall, how a blocking or how an animation timeline looks when you're working in industry is you have your blocking and posing. So you work on that, you get your poses down, you make sure the timing of that's right. Then you have your blocking and timing. You double check that your timing's correct with that blocking pass where you're not seeing any splining. Then you have your splining, which is that first kind of spline pass, like what you guys started with me right here. And then we have polish. Polish isn't actually a thing, it's just more splining. Splining is something you will do until you run out of time. All you'll do when you're doing polish is spline, and then splining some more. You'll spline even longer. It splines for a little bit longer, and then eventually you're told, hey, you're out of time, go render. This is just that last pass of changes that make it more natural. You feel it more than you see it. They're tiny little things in here that you do need to change. It's kind of like you blink. We know you're blinking, but if you don't blink, we think it's weird. It's something we just kind of do. It's something we can feel. It's something that's only felt. That's what splining and polish will do to your animation. It'll make it feel more natural and will overall make your animations look so much better. It's very subtle. Adding overlapping action to hands, to the body parts will also help with this. Think about how the compacting of your animations are. Does your pinky move before your index finger when you close your hand? Is it the opposite? How do your knuckles shift on your hand when you're closing them? What other subtle movements can you get to make it feel more natural? The polish passes are the main difference between TV, games, mobile games, Pixar, and other sorts of animation. Mobile games have less time to work on their animations than overall games that you would see on console and PC. TV animation is a lot less time to, you have a lot less time to work on than film animation. PlayStation 4 games will give you a much longer time than that mobile game. With a mobile game, you'll have maybe 10 seconds to an hour to work on any one animation, whereas for that main game, you'll probably have a good month or two to work on that same 10 seconds. It's the same for Pixar. If you're working for a TV company, they're like, hey, I want you to have this 1 minute animation done within 2 days to a week. That same kind of animation would take Pixar a month or two. It's all about the splining and the polish. How much time do you have before they tell you you have to stop? Polish of Pixar quality is rare in this class, but I do expect you guys to get there if you continue with animation by the time you're seniors. And all that is just taking more time, throwing more polish at your animations to get that look. And that being said, in this class and in others, still give yourself plenty of time to render. We do have the render farm. I know Arnold's isn't working properly right now. We're working on that. But how splining and animation really works is you really just run out of time. You have to still take that animation, throw it out into the world at some point. You still have to get it rendered. I also apparently don't have Project 5 on D2L. So bear with me one moment. All right. So Project 5 is called the Ben-Bot step. So character animation overall can sometimes be overwhelming. You don't really know where to start. Humans and humanoid-like characters can have hundreds of controls, if not more. They can also sometimes be more simple, kind of like Ben-Bot. He only has a couple of handfuls of controls. But what I want you guys to do is follow the pose-to-pose process, the blocking and splining passes that we've talked about to maintain control of our character. Do not fall into a sea of keyframes, and animate Ben-Bot. So using Ben-Bot, animate him stepping over a small object that's less than knee high or under a low-hanging object that's about shoulder height. I do want you guys to use the pose-to-pose process. I do want you to work on the blocking, the breakdown, splining, and the polish. We did start this together. So if you did start this, you can save this, but if you want to start from scratch, you may. And then what is due and when? I do want a rendered animation, no play lasts, on Thursday, November 5th, I think is the date I have written down in here. Yes. It will be due the 5th at the start of class, nice and rendered and ready to be viewed. What this means is all of next week and the Tuesday after are work days. You don't have to show up in here if you don't want to. And to be honest, I'm my remote in myself, so if you do need help, pop into the Zoom at any time if you don't want to come in here physically. And then it will be due rendered on Thursday. Now, I do have the blocking, or I do want the blocking turned in by next class. Just to D2L, just submit it like you would your normal project. It'll let you submit the multiple files. It won't affect your grade for this project if you don't turn your blocking in. There's a very specific reason why I said it in that way. I would pay attention to that. But I do want to see it. It won't get you any extra points. It won't detract you any extra points if you don't turn it in. But it will help your overall process if you turn in your blocking. That way it gives you more time to spline all next week. Does anyone have any questions at all about the blocking and splining, about the Project 5, anything like that? Okay. So that's all I have for lecture today. I wanted to give you guys time in class today to work on that blocking. If you do have a question, those of you remote, feel free to stick around. Those of you here physically, y'all can flag me down if you have any questions. I do want to let you guys know now, and I'll remind you when this is due. The Thursday and Tuesday of November 12th and 17th, I won't be in class. I will be away. My wedding ceremony is that Friday, and I will be stressed. I won't be here. I will be packing furiously. So if you do need me, you can send me an email. I'll be checking that pretty consciously. You'll have started your final by this point, and then something will technically be due the Tuesday I won't be here. But like I said, I will remind you when this is due about all of those dates. So if you forget them, that's okay. I'm just letting you know now as a forewarning. Any questions whatsoever? Those of you remote, if you need to leave or want to leave, you may do so at this point. Those of you in here, if you want to leave and find breakfast, you can. And that's all I have. I'm going to pause the recording, and I will see you guys when this is due, or next class on Tuesday. Goodbye, online people.